Welcome to A Matter of Perspective with Judge Derwin Webb. I am Judge Derwin Webb, coming to you from the Fraser History Museum. I'm honored to be joined today by our guest, the incomparable Mr. Gerald Neal, Senator Gerald Neal, I should say. Brother Neal, how are you today?
I'm doing fine. How are you, Judge?
I'm doing well. I want to thank you for joining the show. I know that there are a lot of things going on in Frankfurt right now, a lot of things going on in the world. You and I talk occasionally about a lot of different things, especially throughout the years, about how things have been at that time. But we haven't really talked recently about what's been going on in the world and what you see. We are in a new year. We're in a new month. We're in Black History Month. But I want to talk, and I'll get to that at some point, but I do want to talk to you about you and what makes you get involved in politics, your background. But before we get to all those different things, tell me what's going on in your life right now. What's going on right now?
Well, I'm trying to negotiate this environment of COVID. It's, I was infected at some point, was in the hospital, and it actually took months to kind of get in balance. So it's been catch up, and it's been that sort of thing. I mean, legislative session on top of it. People are constantly coming. So I'm very busy, and actually I'm excited about it. But at this moment, I think I've arrived. I think I'm fully back in shape. It's just a matter of execution.
Well, let's go back. I was going to talk to you about that a little bit later, but since you touched on it, you did have COVID. And I know we texted during that time when you were first diagnosed.
Appreciated that too.
Tell us about what your symptoms were like, because I think that the word of a vaccination coming out has made people feel a little more comfortable. And they've started doing some things that are probably not in the best interest, not only them, but the people around them. What was it like for you when you first got diagnosed? And talk about your recovery process.
Well, as you know, as reported, it affects people different ways. Some do not feel any effects from it, but they can become carriers nonetheless and share it with others. Some have mild impact in terms of the physical piece, but some like me had a pretty tough time. And there are those that are tougher than the things that I experienced, in fact, ending in death, and as well prolonged situations. I know people that I converse with that are over a year with COVID now, and they still having serious ramifications from it. I was fortunate in the sense that when I was infected, it took, I think the whole piece that affected me took maybe 3 to 4 months. And the way it started off, I started off with a cough, which is a dry cough, and it increased. And then I had a fever, and the fever is what tipped me off. And the reason it tipped me off is that my son, who lives in New York, we encouraged him to come home to Louisville, because at that time they was getting ready to shut down New York. Mm-hmm. And he came home, and while he was here, he contracted COVID. Mm-hmm. So we were part of the process of handling him and nursing him back in some part of the house. So we knew a lot from that. And mm-hmm. we knew, tracking the blood levels, oxygen levels in the blood and all that stuff were indicators. So I got the fever. The fever came on, and I told my wife, and she said, well, it sounds like our son Brandon. She said, we need to check him. I said, well, okay, let me run on over to the urgent care and I'll come back. I went over there. The lady took me through some paces. And she looked at me and said, I took your test. I don't know. I haven't verified that you have COVID, but everything that I can tell, I think you have COVID. So what I want you to do is follow this regimen. So I went on back home, isolated myself. And she told me if my temperature spiked or my blood level piece went down under, I think it was like 93 or something like that, 94, then I need to go to the emergency room right away. Lo and behold, about 3 days later, it did that. I went straight to the emergency room. My feet never touched the floor from there. I walked in, but by that night, I was down and out. I had oxygen at the very high levels. I had a doctor standing over me saying he didn't know which way this was going. I couldn't catch my breath. I had pain all over. They had diagnosed me with both lungs, with COVID pneumonia. And it was a very tenuous situation. It was a miserable situation. And I just didn't know. There was a lot of uncertainty of what was getting ready to happen. I had some, uh, I have diabetes and stuff like that, and that's like a no for COVID. So, doctor told me, he said, I'm going to treat you aggressively. You got to understand, this was like back in last August.
Mm-hmm.
And they know a lot more now than they knew last August. So they didn't know but so much.
Mm-hmm.
So the doctor, I signed off on some stuff, and they gave me a steroid, and they gave me remdesivir and also convalescent plasma, which was an experimental drug, experimental treatment at that time. That's where you get the antibodies of someone else in their plasma, blood plasma. And about 3-4 days later, doctor came back in and said, with a smile, and said, I think it's going in the right direction. And so 3 days later after that, or 4 days, I was released to go home, which amazed them because I don't think they thought I was going to make it. Mm-hmm. And I verified that because I had a telehealth situation where a doctor checked in with me every week. Mm-hmm. And although he didn't say it directly, I could tell by our exchange, we really became conversant that I was on the bubble. So it's become a personal thing to me in terms of other people. I must say I really get disturbed when I see people not wearing masks or social distancing. And at the same time, I know by me showing my disdain doesn't get them to do it. So what I try to do is share as much information as possible that they don't want what I had. Mm-hmm. And they could end up with what I have or worse.
Right.
And that's the situation. So we've had that. Unfortunately, I didn't know I had COVID. I infected my wife with COVID. And while I was doing that, wasn't the, her indicators didn't require her to go into the hospital, but she had a tough time too. Mm-hmm. So that's 3 out of 4 of us. So we spent our time trying to protect our daughter until she can get her shots.
Right. Well, obviously, I'm happy to see that you are recovering well, because I would have missed you. You're good. As I like to tell people, you're a good man. So I'm happy to see that you have pulled through and that you're making the best out of that situation right now, and trying to tell others about your experience so they don't have to go through the same thing.
Right.
Let's go back a little bit.
Let me add one thing.
Go ahead, please.
I'm in the business of now trying to encourage, particularly the Black community, because there's been this disparate impact in the Black community of deaths and infection rates and so forth. And also, there's been this reluctance to be vaccinated. And, to your listening audience, I want to encourage them all, and specifically a message to the Black community that I wouldn't hesitate to take a vaccination. In fact, I've had one. I'm scheduled for a second. And I would encourage it because the risk factors exponentially go up when you don't. So that's my encouragement. I hope that does some good in terms of persuading somebody, but I'll leave it right there.
Well, you continue to get the word out. I'll do my best as well so that we can continue to let us know what needs to happen to prevent this from getting bigger than it actually is. Senator, I want to go back a little bit. I know that you are born and raised in Kentucky, KSU graduate. When did you decide that you wanted to get involved in politics?
Well, that's a complex reaction because I've tried to track exactly when I thought about that. But I think it was after I had started a law firm, came back, was practicing for a number of years. And I've always been interested in politics, but it's always been like a community-oriented thing and supporting a good candidate, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I didn't see myself as an elected political person. But back in those days when I had a law firm, at one time my partner at that time went into politics. I encouraged that and supported him doing that. And that was as close as I wanted to get to politics
Hmm.
at that particular time. But later, my interest grew in terms of electoral politics. And I had, you said I graduated from Kentucky State University. I did that, University of Louisville Law, but also I went to University of Michigan.
Right.
And while I was at Michigan, I ran into a lot of folks and a lot of information and a lot of things that really interest me. And I just got really interested. How does that work? Let me see if I can apply that.
Hmm.
So I started doing that, and I got interested in electoral politics. So I ran. In fact, I ran against the person that I ultimately replaced and lost by 59 votes. That was my good friend and mentor, quite frankly, Georgia Powers.
Right.
10 years later, when she decides to step off, the community group came together and they were concerned about who was going to take her place. And so they kind of tricked me into an interview. That's a story all by itself because I wasn't going to interview.
Uh-huh.
But I did because it was disrespectful not to, because these were all they were all the leaders in the black community, quite frankly,
Right.
most of them. So I went interviewed. We had a good time talking and joking and so forth. Before I got down the hallway, somebody runs up behind me and says, "You're it." And the idea was they was going to throw all their support behind whoever they selected.
Hmm.
And that's how I got in it, quite frankly. So I promised to stay 4 years. So now, more than 30 years later.
A little more than 4 years.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. How I had the pleasure of meeting Senator Powers a little while back when I was a young attorney.
Great lady.
What did it feel like to follow in her footsteps? Because I know that she's a legend in Kentucky and throughout, to be honest with you. So what was it like having to follow in her footsteps?
Well, I was fortunate because she, as I said, at one point in my development, in my youth, in fact, she was one of a group of older folks that were mentors to me. I'm talking about the Georgia Powers, the individuals that were out front at that time, Reverend Hodge. There was a gentleman here named Leo Lesser at that time, or Reverend Leo Lesser at that time. I could just name a bunch of people. There were a lot of people that were mentors. Then there were the younger guys than them, people like Gerald Owens and Raul Cunningham and my good friend, even younger, Billy Gatewood and people like that.
Mhm.
They were active and they were involved in this stuff. So I was involved in it. But that brought me into connection with Senator Powers at that time. And I learned a lot from her. But the real thing that I enjoyed is that when I ultimately took that seat, we had a real unique relationship. She didn't want to invade my space. She wanted me to go ahead and do what I had to do. But she was there for me and told me and opened up the door. And we would talk late in the night, talking about all the things that we could, issues I may have, people I was dealing with, things she thought was important that I should continue on and so forth. And we had that relationship all the way up to the point that actually shortly before she passed away.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very rich relationship. I got some pictures I haven't shown publicly when I was introducing her to the second member of the Senate, Senator Thomas,
Mm-hmm.
where we had our own little personal senator thing going on and so forth. So she was really a tremendous person with tremendous spirit.
Let me ask you this: 30 years later, after being in your seat, what do you feel about the state of politics in Kentucky at this point? I know that's a pretty broad question, but as you're sitting there, and if you were to do a test, litmus test of how things are in Frankfurt right now, what do you feel the state of politics are right now in this era?
Well, I had to measure it against the early days, of course. When I went in, I was in my party had the majority. In fact, I was in line or in a position where it was very possible I would have ended up being the chair of the Appropriations Committee at the very least in that process. But the Senate flipped. So now I'm in an environment that has a majority of the other party. But even though in the Senate was a majority Republican, I'm a Democrat, that the House was Democratic. So I had friends on that side, so I could take my stuff down there. They'd pass it through, and I'd vote for it, and I'd claim it anyway because I generated and authored the legislation. But then the House flipped, so it becomes a whole different environment. Even when it was all Democratic, you had to develop relationships. It's a very difficult process. Folks out here, unless you've been in it, you really don't know. But it's a very difficult process to pass anything, particularly when you're outside of leadership. And the fact of the matter is that the individuals that you deal with, you got to develop relationships. You can't get caught up personally. Things that may hurt you, it may be race, it may be a slight of some sort, it may be anything, a betrayal. When I was coming through, if you said you was going to do something, you better do it because nobody want to deal with you if you didn't, right? Mm-hmm. Now, coming through it, depending on who you're dealing with, it's not so sure. But here's the big one. The big one was that when you're in a minority, you're not going to pass much. I don't care what you do. But that doesn't mean you can't impact legislation. I do it all the time, every year. I know these folks outside of the quote unquote political spotlight. We talk, we deal, we exchange, that happens. But due to the protests you talked about right now, I'm a strong supporter of the protest movement that's taking place, that's ongoing. If not for it, it would have not opened up the doors of conversation that I'm having with people on levels that you cannot imagine. I haven't had conversations maybe 10, 15 years like I'm having right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about engagement. Now, I mean, I'm sure I'm not naive. They got their angle. They after what they after for whatever the reasons are. But then again, I know what the legislation is. I independently think. I understand what I'm doing too. And I don't go in questioning motives. What I do is I look at the legislation itself and I push for those things where it's weak and to strengthen. And those things that are not there, I keep advocating for, and I take advantage of every opportunity I can. Well, so I don't look at it as an opportunity, a do-nothing opportunity. I think there's always the opportunity and the promise for engagement.
I was going to say, you were talking about the conversations and how they have turned. How have the conversations turned, especially in this climate, especially in your position as a politician of color, if you will?
Well, some of the issues, particularly around police accountability, especially in light of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and that which we know goes on today and has gone on historically, is not only being discussed on the House side, but it's being discussed by, guess what, Republicans on our side. I mean, I stood up with the president of the Senate on the issue of banning no-knocks very early on in this process. And in fact, have drafted legislation that I did not file because the leadership is going to determine whether this stuff goes or not. And the question is, what's the nature of that going to be? So I'm working with that process, and we'll see where that goes. If it doesn't do everything I want, but it does something good, I have to go with it. If it doesn't, if it does something bad, I got to fight that.
Right.
If it falls short, I got to advocate for more. Mm-hmm. And I expect it to fall short, but that does not mean it's not a step forward. So I welcome that engagement. And then there's some other conversations, some I'm not at liberty to talk about, that have the promise of doing some big things, quite frankly. The idea and the door opening on that wasn't me opening up the door. It was opened on the other side for whatever their reasons were. And there's some things that are in process that if they come to fruition would be very important to the Black community, in fact, the entire community. So I'm looking at that. Then there are discussions about, guess what, the rest of Kentucky, because what happened with the Metro Council and what the mayor was involved in and things that directly were a result of the protests here in Louisville. Well, that reverberated through the state and also raised the question, what happens when you cross the the county line mm-hmm. into the rest of Kentucky? So there's obligations across. And then I might point out there's this opportunity that's still in process called Senate Bill 10, where they're talking about this commission on dealing with race and right. opportunity and all that. And some people say, here comes another commission. Well, that's what we do. We create laws, we set up policies, we set up commissions to do things. Now, whether they fall short or not, we're going to see. But there's something significant about that because now if they adopt this legislation and they make it a commission, not a committee, if they make it a commission, then that means that we've set up a structure to bring the discussion of race in-house on the table, on the level of leadership, focused toward recommendations to bring about changes based upon information, data, etc., and not some emotion or somebody's got a great idea. I think the potential there could be tremendous. We'll have to see how that plays out.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, a few years back, I had an opportunity to meet a guy named Elijah Cummings. Elijah Cummings came to Kentucky. We had an opportunity to sit down and talk about a lot of different things, about the state, about the community, about the country. Curious, I know that you originally said that you wanted to be in that position for about 4 years, and 30 years later, we're still in that position. Did you ever think about doing something on the national level?
Well, yeah, it's interesting you said that. I can remember, I'll share, I can remember my wife and I were driving to Washington, D.C. some years ago when the congressional seat came up, and I was approached. But they didn't come up with enough money that they would promise to raise for me to come in at a late date. So I had now, and that was asked to run nationally. I've been asked to run in other seats locally. So in that particular regard, I've had opportunities, but they didn't fit my movement and what I thought I was in a position to do. And I didn't. I supported others. The other thing is that I've always been in national activity. In fact, I'm proud to say that I was on the first elected Black American Law Student Association board back in the day, and that still exists in various of the law schools across the country. And we did national work in terms of law school, particularly in terms of more African Americans being admitted into school, et cetera. And right now, I serve as a board member and officer on the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, and we are doing tremendous work that we have laid out now that deals with a lot of the issues that are the issues of the day. So those are just some of them. I've always been on the national and the local and the statewide scene in some capacity.
Well, I know that you're a Kentucky senator, but at the same time, I know you follow politics nationally as well. What are your views of what we are seeing out of Washington these days?
Wow, well, that's a wide open question.
It is a wide open question. Okay, let's talk about new election. We have new president. We have an interesting group of politicians on the national level. I'll put it like that.
To say the least, right?
What do you think? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
As it relates to the president, I'm very hopeful. It's almost like a little window emerged because the stars aligned for a moment, and we're going to see if they're aligned for a sustained period. But that Georgia election that
and I was going to talk about the Georgia election as well, but go ahead, please.
Yes. Should I go forward?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. That Georgia election was the key to what's happening right now. If that had not happened, then that bill, in terms of the COVID relief bill and so forth, which also relates to the economy from different ways, would never happen, would never have had the opportunity to come forward because the Republican-led Senate by Senator McConnell, Kentucky Senator McConnell, quite frankly, is a reactionary in this particular regard. He's a stumbling block. He's the same individual that made it a point to try to undo the first African-American president in the history of the United States of America. He's got this philosophy that, we can spend money now because we got it, but when you're leading the charge, oh no, we must be conservative with our money, et cetera. I mean, it's the hypocrisy of high order. But the point is that the opportunity is there. I full well think that this president is going to invite bipartisanship, which he should. He should encourage it, but he should go forward with the things he was elected upon, just like this $1.9 trillion relief bill and some other things that he's going to have to do by a parliamentary maneuver called reconciliation. But it's going to be tough in these other areas without bipartisanship because of the 60 vote rule to go forward on most legislation. So it's going to be a tough road, but I think those being there at this moment, at this time, and particularly relieving us of the situation of the prior president, who is a whole discussion all by itself. I'm not going to go into it unless you ask me specifically. But my point is that I think we're in a much better situation. But here's the issue. The issue is not just that. The issue is what's going to happen in the midterm elections.
Absolutely.
Whether or not they're going to, historically, the in party is the out party in midterm elections. We're going to have to see how that goes because there's some dynamics that are going on now that are not historically, or are not generally historically in place. So it may not come out that way. So if we can maintain that, and President Biden can get 4 years, and you can have the House and the Senate, then I think that he's going to put a really strong print on the country. I think he's going to put us in position to revitalize the economy. He's going to put folks back to work. He's going to be talking about wages, living wages, and not just what an employer wants to pay you and you can barely scrape by. He's going to be talking about racial justice. He's talking about building back. He's talking about equity. I am very encouraged by hearing what I'm hearing and seeing what I'm seeing now.
Change direction a little bit. We're in Black History Month now. And I know I've talked to a lot of people over the past few days. They want to talk about the future of the party. They want to talk about rising stars of Charles Booker and Atticus Scott, talk about the future. But with it being Black History Month and your history yourself, can you talk about some of the influential people that got you to where you are today, outside of Georgia Powers? The people that helped mold you into the person that you are right now, the people that you looked up to. Talk a little bit about your history of Black politics and what helped you get to where you are right now.
Well, my roots are in my family. I have to start with my mother and father. They were a tremendous influence on me and my siblings. They molded us. All of us were community oriented. All of us were raised to look for and engage in ways that we thought we can contribute. So I think that's where the molding came. But along the way, a lot of folks were involved in my development. But my father was very intentional. I tell this story all the time because it's amazing as I look back, because I was a little naive about it early on. But I remember when I first went to college, and my father told me, he said, "I want you to go and see these individuals. You call them, they will see you." And that's all he said. Mm-hmm. And he said, "I want you to call them." And I did. And guess what? They saw me. They would see me within the hour. Mm-hmm. You know, it was kind of amazing. I started taking for, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. My daddy told me to do this, etc. And I would go in and see them, and they would sit down and ask me questions. And then if I left out something, they'd leave me with a nugget. It wasn't like they were telling me what to do. It was a nugget. They were wisdom nuggets of wisdom. And I can name some of those people to this day. And I look back and I said, my God, this is how I developed the relationship with these people. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about people like Frank Stanley. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about people like William Summers, that they called him Jig Summers there with WLOU Radio.
Right.
I'm talking about people like Lyman Johnson. I'm talking about people like Woodford Porter. I'm talking about, there was a couple of more.
You named off some icons.
But yes. See, I didn't realize it then, but I had lifelong relationships with these folks. Mm-hmm. Okay. I was working with them. I was growing older and interacting with them and involved with them in different ways. And it just sort of evolved. So they all had a tremendous influence. And if I went to them for something, boom, it was going to happen, you mm-hmm. see? And I knew it was going to happen. And that's sort of, this way it's supposed to be. When I look back on it, it was kind of amazing when I look at it now. So they were very intentional. And what I found out was despite where they were in relationship to each other socially or politically or otherwise, these folks were actually connected with each other in different ways. And I would not be surprised if, in fact, I know they were doing this with other young people that were coming up during the time as well. The other thing is what it did was, though, it set a model for me. I must have about 30, 35, maybe 40 young people across the country, several of which are in our community, that have direct access to me, that would not have the ability to be able to walk through various doors, but they know when to ask me for what. And if I'm in the position, I enable them. I got that from what my father did. I'm telling you this story because it's easy to pick out those names of individuals, and I can't pick out all of them because we had the W.J. Hodges, I'll never forget the time when they were doing Village West and they dumbed down the what they were, the level, the quality of materials and stuff. At least that was our perception. And W.J. Hodge got wind of they were getting ready to start the bulldozer down there the next morning. My goodness, they were getting ready to, against resistance in the community. No, y'all need to do better with this. And he said, I said, well, what do you think we ought to do? And we talked about it back and forth. You know where we were the next morning? Just me and W.J. Hodge standing in front of a bulldozer, getting ready to, unearth some earth. We didn't get to stop it. You know what I'm saying? But just think about what I just said. I mean, that guy, that minister, was of tremendous stature. He was he had political stature. And he was very intentional and had respect in community. And here was little old Neal running around, taking for granted that I'm supposed to do this stuff and let's do so and so. These guys actually were part of the molding that was ongoing in terms of my commitments to the community. So when I look at it now, I can run around and say, boy, I sure thought about this and I did this and I did that. But the reality is nobody's like that. We all in a community context, a family context, and bigger context, and they mold us. And we interact and take advantage of opportunities. Sometimes it works. Sometimes we make bad judgments. Sometimes it doesn't work. But we're a part of a network of individuals that make us who we are.
Well, I can honestly say this. I'm a product of your generosity because I know for sure that anytime I want to get in touch with you, I call and you answer. Anytime I send a text message, you respond. So I want to thank you for being that person for me that helps me get some things done or get to this point or do this because of the generosity you've always shown me. So I just want to thank you for that.
That's kind of you, but we're real proud of you.
Well, thank you. Well, I'll tell you this. I'm not about to give you a Lifetime Achievement Award, even though you've achieved a lot, because you still have more work to do. I understand that. But if someone was to mention your name, how would you want them to remember you, and what would you want them to say?
It's not up to me. I don't think like that. I hear your question. I don't really know how to respond to a question like that. I just do what I think my purpose is here to do, and I'm going to run that race until the race is over. That's where I was prepared. That's where I am. So it's hard for me to think in that framework.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, let me tell you this. I know that you have run this race, and I can honestly say you've run it well. And I appreciate all that you've done to this point, not only for the community, but for me as well. But I want to thank you for being here today. I called you and I said, can you do this for me? Like, absolutely. At a minute's notice, you were ready to come on. So I want to say thank you for being a part of the show. And I want to thank you for all the things you've done in this community, you and your family.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here, and stay strong and stay safe.
I will. And I will tell you this, as I always end the show, it's not a matter of what you say. It's not what I think. At the end of the day, it's all a matter of perspective. So thanks a lot for being here.